The summer sun over northern France did not shine with warmth. It burned with a pale, merciless heat that rose from shattered roads, broken hedgerows, and the blackened carcasses of German vehicles left behind after the breakout from Normandy. It was July 1944, only days after Operation Cobra had torn open the German lines, and the Third Army under Lieutenant General George S. Patton was surging forward like a storm, finally released from its chains. The men believed the war was finally turning. They believed momentum was on their side. But momentum could be a liar, and the land ahead of them still belonged to an enemy who knew how to bleed a moving army. The push toward Metz was in full motion when the story began. Tank columns rolled forward in clouds of dust. Half-tracks bounced over ruined farm roads. Long lines of infantry marched with their helmets pushed back on sweaty foreheads. But the first American machines to enter any unknown road or silent forest were never the Shermans, never the tank destroyers, never the infantry platoons. It was always the reconnaissance crews. Thin-skinned, lightly armed, barely armored, fast, exposed, forgotten, but essential. And on this day, it fell to a small reconnaissance platoon of M8 Greyhound armored cars from the 4th Armored Division to scout ahead toward a cluster of woods near the village of Dompierre. Their leader, Staff Sergeant Walter Briggs, sat in the turret of the lead M8. 26 years old, tall, narrow-eyed, and already a veteran of North Africa and Sicily, Briggs knew how quiet could betray danger. The road felt wrong to him almost as soon as they rolled onto it. There were too many fresh track marks, but no signs of retreating German vehicles. The branches above them were disturbed in ways that did not match the wind, and the air carried a smell he had learned to fear, the faint, chemical tang of burnt powder from guns recently fired. The Greyhound moved with a restrained speed, its engine rumbling under the armored hull. The 6-wheeled suspension kicked dust into the air as it advanced. The gunners scanned the tree line. The radio man kept one hand on the transmitter, waiting for Briggs to speak. Nobody talked. Nobody joked. The silence did not feel natural. In France, you always heard something. A tractor hidden in a barn, birds in the tree line, a far-off artillery shot. Here, there was nothing. Briggs raised his binoculars. Ahead, the road narrowed into a corridor of tall trees, a perfect place for an ambush. He motioned for the column to halt. The second M8 braked behind him. The third spread out on the left shoulder. The men took defensive positions. They were only scouts, not meant to fight a battle, but they were always the first who would learn if a battle was coming. He studied the ground again. Fresh shovel marks. Earth moved too recently. Someone had dug in something large. He whispered into the turret. "Look at that right side. Third oak from the bend. That is no shadow." The gunner stared and slowly nodded. The outline became clear once he focused. The straight edge of a gun shield, a long barrel, too long for anything but a German 88. Briggs's heart tightened. The 88 was not a weapon to stumble upon. In Sicily, he had seen one tear the turret off a Sherman with a single hit. In Normandy, he had watched an entire column freeze when the first round cracked through the air. An 88 hidden in a forest meant trouble. One 88 rarely stood alone. He signaled the second M8 to stay in cover and advanced his own vehicle only a few feet forward. The engine hummed as he stopped at a new angle. Through the leaves, he now saw a flicker of movement. A German helmet rising above a gun pit, a loader carrying a shell, a second position only 15 yards beyond Metz, mostly concealed. And further back, the unmistakable black silhouette of a heavy tank turret rotating slightly. The Panther. The Germans were setting up a full kill zone. Briggs realized they were minutes, maybe less, from being discovered. And behind them, several miles back along the same narrow road, the main American column was approaching. Shermans, half-tracks, trucks loaded with infantry. If they rolled into this corridor, the 88s and Panthers would tear them apart in the first 30 seconds.
He lowered his binoculars and clenched his jaw. His orders were clear. Do not engage. Do not get pinned. Detect the threat. Report it. But sometimes scouting required more than looking. Sometimes it required risking everything to learn the full truth. He spoke quietly but firmly. We push another 100 yards off the main road. I want the whole picture before we call it in. His driver swallowed. Off-road meant lurching over roots, sliding through dirt, and exposing themselves to unseen fire. But the man nodded. The Greyhound eased left into the brush. Branches scraped the armor. The radio antenna whipped overhead. They crawled at walking speed, engine humming low, weaving around trunks and fallen limbs. The forest swallowed them, but also obscured them from German eyes. Through gaps in the leaves, Briggs saw more evidence. 2 machine gun nests, a squad of infantry lying prone, rifles aimed at the kill zone. And worst of all, another Panther repositioning behind a hillock, preparing to deliver the first fatal strike on whatever American vehicle appeared on the road. Briggs felt a cold sweat roll down his back. The Germans were not preparing to fight. They were preparing to slaughter. That was enough. He grabbed the radio handset. Get me command. Priority message, now. The radio man began transmitting the first coordinates. Briggs stared ahead at the quiet forest, knowing that what happened in the next hour would determine whether hundreds of American soldiers lived or died. The summer air felt still, too still. The trap was ready, and only the men in the Greyhound knew it.
The forest did not feel like a place where a battle would begin. It felt like a place where something waited. The humidity clung to the skin. The branches drooped low. The dust hung in the air without wind to carry it. The Greyhound moved slowly, weaving between trees, every turn of the wheel sounding louder than it should have. Staff Sergeant Briggs kept his binoculars up as the vehicle crept forward through the underbrush. He knew the Germans were close, not ahead in the distance, but close enough for a careless branch snap to give their position away. The gunner, Private Leonard Hale, whispered from the turret, "I see another dugout, left side, 2 men." Briggs focused on the spot. A thin outline of a German Stahlhelm, the barrel of a machine gun. They were watching the road, not the woods. The Germans believed the Americans would come straight down the center. They always expected the enemy to behave the way their doctrine predicted. That arrogance was the only reason Briggs and his men were still alive. The Greyhound rolled to a stop behind a fallen oak. The branches gave decent cover, though not enough to stop an .88 round. Briggs dismounted quietly, dropping down into the brush. Hale followed. The two moved a few yards ahead on foot, crouched low, binoculars and carbines ready. The air smelled of damp leaves and faint traces of diesel fuel. They followed the scent. A soft metallic clank echoed through the woods. Briggs froze. It sounded like a turret lock. He crept forward and parted a cluster of ferns. There it was, a German Panther angled across a shallow rise, its long barrel pointed at the exact bend in the road where the American column would appear. Painted in worn 3-tone camouflage, the tank was half hidden by netting and brush the Germans had carefully tied across its hull. 2 crewmen stood beside it, smoking and talking in low voices. They had the boredom of men who believed they would win without effort. Briggs felt anger rise in him. It was the arrogance of a hunter waiting for prey. That Panther was not there for a fight. It was there for a kill. Behind the Panther, beyond a cluster of trees, he could make out a second long barrel. Another one. 2 Panthers, possibly more. And once those tanks opened fire, the .88s would finish what they started. He moved back to the Greyhound and climbed inside. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes showed urgency. "We got enough. Call it in." The radio man adjusted the frequencies on the SCR 508. Static filled the cabin, followed by a faint voice from battalion. Briggs dictated the first set of coordinates. 88 emplacement, Panther 1, Panther 2, machine gun nests, estimated infantry strength, direction of fire, distance from the road.
The young radio man repeated everything with the clipped precision of someone who understood that every second mattered. Briggs listened to the reply. The request was being passed immediately to regimental command, then division, then the 3rd Army operations net. That was unusual. Recon reports did not normally travel that fast. Briggs knew what it meant. Patton wanted speed, and a threat to his spearhead was a threat to the entire offensive. He looked out at the forest again. The Germans were still preparing, still shifting, still setting tripods, adjusting barrels, digging pits. They were minutes away from finishing their kill box. Once the first American Sherman appeared on the bend, the 88s would punch through it before the crew even spotted danger. Then the Panthers would fire from 2 angles. The half-tracks behind it would have no room to maneuver. The infantry trucks would be trapped in a corridor of trees. It would be a massacre. A bush rustled somewhere to their right. Hale snapped his carbine into his shoulder. A German soldier stepped into view, no more than 15 yards away. He had not seen them yet. He was adjusting his tunic, mumbling under his breath, carrying a bundle of camo netting. Briggs held up his hand. Do not fire. The man wandered past, oblivious, and disappeared around a tree. Had he looked up for even a second, he would have seen the muzzle of the M8's turret gun glinting through the leaves. But luck was with them. When Briggs exhaled, the tension did not leave him. It grew. We pull back now, he said. Slow, quiet. We do not let them sniff us out. The driver put the vehicle in reverse, careful not to crush branches that might snap loudly. The Greyhound slid backward through the brush. Leaves raked across the armor. Twigs tapped against the tires. Every sound felt dangerously loud. But the Germans were focused on the road, not the woods. It took nearly 5 minutes to return to the forest edge. Briggs climbed halfway out of the turret and scanned the killing zone one more time. 2 Panthers, 188, maybe 2, at least a platoon of infantry. Machine guns dug in, perfect angles, perfect concealment. He felt a chill in his chest. If they had stayed on the road, they would already be dead. Once the Greyhound cleared the tree line, Briggs ordered the platoon to regroup on a small ridge overlooking the valley. From here, he could see the road stretch like a ribbon toward the dark forest where the trap waited. He checked his watch. The American column would reach that bend in less than an hour. The radio cracked again. This time, the voice was urgent. New orders. Patton himself had read the report. The 3rd Army was changing direction. Briggs looked at his crew. Their faces were pale, as if they all understood what would have happened had they arrived only a few minutes later. The forest below remained silent, too silent. The Germans were still waiting for prey that would never come. And the M8 platoon knew the truth. The kill zone they had just discovered was not designed to stop the 3rd Army. It was designed to destroy it.
The message traveled faster than the men who sent it. The radio transmission from Briggs' platoon leaped through the static-filled air, passing from one command post to another. What began as a calm but urgent field report from a dusty M8 squad deep in the woods soon reached the high-level operations net of the 3rd Army. Officers traced the coordinates. Staff maps were pulled out. Pencil lines were drawn. It took less than 4 minutes for the warning to land on the desk of a man who rarely sat still for anything. Lieutenant General George S. Patton listened with his jaw clenched. He stood inside a commandeered French farmhouse, his boots still muddy from the morning briefing, his ivory-handled pistols glinting under the low light of an oil lamp. A young captain finished reading the transmission aloud. Patton said nothing at first. He moved toward the map on the wall and stabbed a finger at the exact bend in the road where the ambush lay hidden. "You are telling me my lead column is marching straight into that?" he said. "Yes, sir. 2 Panther tanks confirmed. Possibly a 3rd. 1 or 2 88 positions. Infantry and support." Patton breathed heavily through his nose. He had spent his entire military life studying speed, maneuver, and the art of hitting the enemy before the enemy could hit him. But speed without caution was suicide. He had seen what German 88s and Panther guns did to American armor.
If his men were caught in that kill zone, the Panthers would cut the first Shermans in half before they even rotated a turret, and the 88s would rake the following columns with precision fire. Hundreds of casualties, hours lost, momentum shattered. He turned sharply. Redirect the column. Now, left hook, wide arc. Tell the artillery to concentrate fire on these coordinates. He tapped the exact points reported by Briggs. His voice rose. Not one round short. Level that forest. Patton did not ask who the scout was, but his next words revealed everything he felt. If those men in the Greyhound had not seen this, we would be picking up pieces of our own boys by nightfall. Back on the ridge overlooking the valley, the Greyhound crew was still monitoring radio traffic. The men heard the sudden changes in tone. Orders shifted. Units were rerouted. Artillery battalions were spinning their guns to face new angles. The entire weight of the Third Army was pivoting because of the message they had sent. Briggs sat half outside the turret, headset pressed against his ear, listening. When he heard that the lead regiment was changing direction, a breath he did not know he held finally left him. "We did it," Hale murmured. "Not yet," Briggs replied. "They have to survive the next part." 10 minutes later, the first American artillery shells screamed overhead. The sound was low at first, a distant moan drifting through the summer heat. Then it grew into the deep, ripping thunder that only heavy guns could produce. A line of explosions tore into the tree line where the Panthers lurked. The men watched from the ridge as branches and dirt erupted skyward in violent bursts. The forest convulsed as if struck by a giant hand. Flames licked upward. Smoke bloomed in thick gray clouds. The Germans had not expected this. They had expected a column of American tanks driving straight into their crosshairs. Instead, they received a rain of explosives delivered with chilling accuracy. Panthers shook under the shock waves. One marked position erupted in a plume of fire, splitting the camouflage net in half. Machine gun nests disappeared in flashes of light. The 88 pit that Briggs had spotted first took a direct hit. The blast threw debris across the woods like a handful of gravel tossed into the wind. Briggs allowed himself a brief, grim smile. The precision meant only one thing. Patton believed the report. The radio crackled again, a new message. All forward units adjust course. Avoid the valley road. Greyhound platoon, maintain overwatch. The men of the M8 platoon knew what that meant. Their job was not over. They were to stay in position until the danger was gone. If the Germans tried to break through the forest or reposition their guns, the Greyhounds would be the first to see it. The artillery barrage continued for nearly 10 minutes, each thunderous blast shaping the forest into twisted silhouettes. Then the shelling stopped. Smoke drifted over the valley floor in slow, heavy curtains. No movement came from the German side. Hale leaned forward, squinting. "Think anyone could live through that?" Briggs answered quietly. "A Panther, maybe. An 88 gun crew? No." He looked at the ridge road behind them. The distant column of American vehicles was now shifting away from the danger zone. The Shermans moved like steel animals, changing direction. The half-tracks veered into open fields. The infantry trucks slowed, then regrouped under the guidance of field officers waving colored flags. The entire machine of war turned, impenetrable and synchronized. All of it happened because one scout platoon had warned them in time. The weight of that truth settled on the men. Recon crews were used to being overlooked. They were ghosts ahead of the army, always alone, always forgotten, yet always the first to see death. But today, they had stopped death before it arrived. Briggs watched the smoke drift upward, illuminated by the dull afternoon sun. He felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. They had cut the fuse before the explosion. He wondered if the Germans understood what had happened, if they realized the prey they had prepared to kill had simply vanished from their sights. The radio came alive once more with a single message from battalion. "Well done. Hold position until further orders."
The forest still smoldered when the artillery stopped. Smoke curled upward in long gray coils, drifting lazily across the valley like ghosts reluctant to leave the place where they had been born. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the heavy, waiting silence of a battlefield that had been denied its purpose. No German counterfire came. No Panther engines roared to life. No shouts echoed through the trees. It was as if the entire ambush line had been frozen in place, caught between the moment of preparation and the moment of killing, unable to move now that the moment itself had been stolen. Briggs remained on the ridge with his binoculars, studying every inch of the forest below. Recon men trusted silence even less than gunfire. A quiet forest could hide movement, survivors, counterattacks, or a second trap. But as the minutes passed, Briggs saw only the aftermath of destruction. A shattered tree trunk, a collapsed dugout, a ribbon of smoke rising from what had once been an 88 emplacement. The German ambush line had been carved apart before it had even drawn breath. Behind him, the other two M8s idled quietly. The crews rested with their helmets off, wiping sweat and dust from their faces, drinking from warm canteens. The tension in their bodies had not disappeared. It had simply settled deeper, like a stone sinking into water. They had escaped death, but they were still close enough to feel its presence. Hale climbed halfway out of the turret and joined Briggs at the ridge edge. He scanned the valley and frowned. "You think any of them will try to slip out the back?" "If they do," Briggs said, "they will not get far. Our boys are circling around them now." And it was true. Far to the left, barely visible through the summer haze, the lead elements of the redirected American column were sweeping in a wide hook through the fields. Shermans moved in disciplined rows, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Infantry companies marched behind them, helmets catching the thin sunlight. The entire formation curved around the forest, avoiding the kill zone, bypassing the ambush, pushing forward toward Metz as if nothing had threatened them at all. War rarely offered such clean escapes. Briggs knew that. Everyone in the platoon did. The Germans had spent hours preparing an attack that should have split the American spearhead in two. It should have bought them time. It should have inflicted terror. It should have changed the shape of the campaign. But instead, all their work, all their calculations, all their expectation had been undone by a single message sent through a crackling radio headset. He lowered the binoculars. "We are moving in. Slow approach." The order was passed down. The 3 M8 Greyhounds rolled from the ridge and descended toward the edge of the forest. The engines purred softly as the vehicles crept forward, their wheels crushing burnt leaves and shrapnel scattered by the artillery. The air grew hotter. The smell of charred earth grew stronger. The forest canopy sagged in places where the blasts had snapped branches like dry twigs. As they reached the first line of trees, Briggs signaled the column to halt. He stepped off the vehicle and advanced on foot. The others followed at a distance, weapons ready, boots sinking into soil churned by explosions. The heat from the scorched craters radiated against their faces. Bits of twisted metal lay half buried in the dirt. A helmet, dented and blackened. A length of broken gun shield. Shattered wood from the old road sign that once stood somewhere nearby. Briggs reached what had remained of the first 88 position. The pit was destroyed. Dirt and debris had been thrown outward in a wide circle. The gun itself was overturned. Its barrel cracked open near the breech, its wheels splintered. No bodies were visible. The blast had taken everything except a few scraps of uniform cloth and a melted sighting mechanism. He felt no satisfaction, only a cold certainty. This was not victory. This was prevention, a battle erased before it could begin. The platoon moved deeper toward the Panther positions. The first Panther lay on its side, flipped halfway into a depression created by the barrage. The camouflage netting still clung to parts of its hull, now torn and burned. The tank looked broken, not destroyed by combat, but crushed by some invisible weight. He walked around it slowly, hand on his carbine. A hatch was open. Smoke drifted from inside. No movement. The second Panther fared no better. It was upright, but immobile, its tracks blown off, its turret canted at an awkward angle.
A large crater lay beside it, evidence of the shell that had disabled it. One crewman had tried to crawl out through the turret hatch before the tank was hit again. His body lay half concealed under a burnt branch, still and silent. The machine gun nests were empty, the trenches abandoned or collapsed. Footprints led away from the positions, heading east, deeper into the forest where the artillery had not reached. The Germans who survived had fled, leaving behind their ambush, their weapons and their plans. Briggs raised his radio. "Contact command. Ambush site neutralized. Multiple enemy casualties. No remaining armor threat. Survivors retreating east. Estimated low number." The message was acknowledged. Overhead, the sky dimmed slightly as a curtain of smoke drifted across the sun. The world turned a muted gray, as if the day itself were mourning something unseen. Hale climbed halfway out of the turret and joined Briggs at the ridge edge. He scanned the valley and frowned. "You think any of them will turn to slip out the back?" "If they do," Briggs said, "they will not get far. Our boys are circling around them now." And it was true. Far to the left, barely visible through the summer haze, the lead elements of the redirected American column were sweeping in a wide hook through the fields. Shermans moved in disciplined rows, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Infantry companies marched behind them, helmets catching the thin sunlight. The entire formation curved around the forest, avoiding the kill zone, bypassing the ambush, pushing forward toward Metz as if nothing had threatened them at all. War rarely offered such clean escapes. Briggs knew that. Everyone in the platoon did. The Germans had spent hours preparing an attack that should have split the American spearhead in two. It should have bought them time. It should have inflicted terror. It should have changed the shape of the campaign. But instead, all their work, all their calculations, all their expectation had been undone by a single message sent through a crackling radio headset. He lowered the binoculars. "We are moving in. Slow approach." The order was passed down. The 3 M8 Greyhounds rolled from the ridge and descended toward the edge of the forest. The engines purred softly as the vehicles crept forward, their wheels crushing burnt leaves and shrapnel scattered by the artillery. The air grew hotter. The smell of charred earth grew stronger. The forest canopy sagged in places where the blasts had snapped branches like dry twigs. As they reached the first line of trees, Briggs signaled the column to halt. He stepped off the vehicle and advanced on foot. The others followed at a distance, weapons ready, boots sinking into soil churned by explosions. The heat from the scorched craters radiated against their faces. Bits of twisted metal lay half buried in the dirt. A helmet, dented and blackened. A length of broken gun shield. Shattered wood from the old road sign that once stood somewhere nearby. Briggs reached what had remained of the first 88 position. The pit was destroyed. Dirt and debris had been thrown outward in a wide circle. The gun itself was overturned, its barrel cracked open near the breech, its wheels splintered. No bodies were visible. The blast had taken everything except a few scraps of uniform cloth and a melted sighting mechanism. He felt no satisfaction, only a cold certainty. This was not victory. This was prevention, a battle erased before it could begin. The platoon moved deeper toward the Panther positions. The first Panther lay on its side, flipped halfway into a depression created by the barrage. The camouflage netting still clung to parts of its hull, now torn and burned. The tank looked broken, not destroyed by combat, but crushed by some invisible weight. He walked around it slowly, hand on his carbine. A hatch was open. Smoke drifted from inside. No movement. The second Panther fared no better. It was upright, but immobile. Its tracks blown off, its turret canted at an awkward angle. A large crater lay beside it, evidence of the shell that had disabled it. One crewman had tried to crawl out through the turret hatch before the tank was hit again. His body lay half concealed under a burnt branch, still and silent. The machine gun nests were empty.
the trenches abandoned or collapsed. Footprints led away from the positions, heading east, deeper into the forest where the artillery had not reached. The Germans who survived had fled, leaving behind their ambush, their weapons and their plans. Briggs raised his radio. "Contact command. Ambush site neutralized. Multiple enemy casualties. No remaining armor threat. Survivors retreating east. Estimated low number." The message was acknowledged. Overhead, the sky dimmed slightly as a curtain of smoke.
The sun was low in the sky when the Greyhound platoon finally returned to the temporary command post. The heat of the day had begun to fade, leaving behind the faint golden glow that settled across the fields and dust-covered vehicles of the Third Army. Soldiers moved between tents, supply trucks, and radios, unaware of how close they had come to disaster only hours earlier. Engines rumbled in the distance as units continued their redirected advance, untouched by the ambush that had been waiting for them in the valley. Briggs stepped down from the M8, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. His uniform was streaked with dust, smoke, and sweat. His face carried the look of a man who had stared at something deadly and walked away before it could reach him. The rest of his platoon climbed out as well, stretching tired limbs, rubbing the grime from their eyes, each absorbed in their own thoughts. They had done their job, but the weight of what they had prevented had not yet settled fully in their minds. An officer approached briskly, Colonel Jameson, chief of reconnaissance operations for the division. He held a clipboard and a map bag under one arm. Briggs straightened reflexively. "At ease, Sergeant," Jameson said. His voice carried no edge, only respect. "I have read your report. Command has read it as well. You saved a lot of men today." Briggs nodded once, not knowing how to answer. He had never fought for credit. Recon men rarely did. Their victories were invisible, measured in the battles that never happened, the casualties that never appeared on lists, the advances that continued without interruption. Jameson motioned toward the farmhouse where the Third Army command staff worked. "The general wants to hear the details directly. Go on in." Briggs blinked. The general? Patton. He walked through the doorway into a dimly lit room where maps covered the walls and a radio operator hunched over a transmitter. Patton stood at the far end, hands behind his back, studying a newly drawn set of arrows on the Met's approach. He wore his polished helmet with the 3 stars, dust still clinging to the sides. His ivory-handled pistols hung at his waist. He did not turn when Briggs entered, but he spoke immediately, as if he had sensed the sergeant the moment the door opened. "You are the scout," Patton said. "Yes, sir," Briggs replied. Patton turned. His eyes were sharp, cold, and alive. He stepped closer, studying the young sergeant with an expression that held more weight than anger or approval. It was the look of a commander measuring a man who had changed the course of his army. "You saw them before they saw you." "Yes, sir." "You reported quickly." "Yes, sir." "You stayed long enough to know what they had planned." "Yes, sir." Patton nodded slowly, then looked back at the map. He tapped a finger on the location of the destroyed ambush. "That ambush would have shattered my left arm," he said. "A Panther gun firing on the road is the devil himself, and an 88 dug into a tree line will crack a Sherman like an egg. We would have lost men, many men. I do not take losses lightly." He turned again, his voice lowering. "Your report reached me in time. I changed the advance. The army kept moving. No delay, no confusion, no disaster. That is not luck. That is reconnaissance. That is what wins wars." Briggs felt heat rise in his face. He was not used to praise, especially not from a man like Patton. Patton stepped forward until he stood close enough for Briggs to see the dust settled into the creases of his gloves. His voice softened. "If I had one friend in a war, it was the man in a Greyhound." The words did not echo. They sank, heavy and unmistakable, into the air between them.
Patton was not a man known for sentiment. He did not thank men lightly, but in that moment, his meaning was clear. Of all the machines in his army, of all the weapons and formations and armored columns, the scouts who rode ahead in thin-skinned M8s were the ones who gave him eyes. They gave him survival. They gave him speed. Patton dismissed Briggs with a nod, nothing more. But as the sergeant stepped back into the fading sunlight, he understood the depth of what had been said. The Greyhound platoon had not only saved lives, they had preserved the advance of the Third Army, kept Patton's momentum alive, and prevented a blow that could have changed the tempo of the campaign in France. The other men gathered around him. Hale smiled faintly. "What did he say?" Briggs hesitated. Then he answered simply. "He said we did our job." The platoon climbed back onto their M8s. Engines rumbled to life. Dust swirled behind the armored wheels. The sun dipped lower in the sky as the Greyhounds rolled out once again, returning to the front, to the roads nobody else had driven yet, to the places where danger always waited first. They left behind no medals, no ceremony, no applause, only the faint echo of a general's words and the quiet truth that sometimes the greatest victories are the battles that never happen. And in the summer of 1944, on the road to Metz, it was the men in the Greyhound who saw death coming and turned an ambush into nothing more than smoke drifting over silent trees.